An Uber driver spotted a strange creature crawling out of the woods onto the road at 3 a.m. At first, he assumed it was a wild animal, but as he got closer, a chill ran down his spine. The city pulsed with life as John navigated through the congested streets, neon lights reflecting off his windshield. It was atypical, the time when the bars emptied, clubs closed, and the streets became a chaotic mix of drunken laughter, stumbling figures, and eager taxi hails. Friday night into Saturday morning. This was the best time for fares. A good night could mean a fat stack of cash, enough to make up for slow weekdays. And tonight had been one of those nights. He was exhausted, running on coffee and sheer determination, but at least his earnings had made it worthwhile. John checked his phone at a red light. Another ride request had popped up. Pick up, corner of 8th and Jefferson destination, to be determined. A last-minute fare. Maybe someone too drunk to type in their address. Not uncommon. John sighed, accepted the ride, and turned onto 8th Street. The closer he got, the quieter the streets became. Most of the action was back in the entertainment district, but this area was more desolate. Old office buildings, a few dimly lit storefronts, and a gas station that looked like it had seen better days. His headlights illuminated the curb where a man stood alone under a flickering street lamp. John's instincts stirred. Something about this wasn't right. The man wasn't swaying like a typical drunk. He wasn't scrolling his phone like someone waiting for a ride. He just stood still, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a dark hoodie, watching the car approach. John's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He thought about cancelling, just driving off and picking up someone else in a safer part of town. But then, the man took a step forward and raised a hand. Too late now. John unlocked the doors, forcing a polite, professional tone. "You, Dylan?" The man nodded and slid into the back seat. John's nose twitched at the scent of alcohol and cigarettes. The guy's face was shadowed under the hood, but he was young, mid-20s maybe. Something in his posture seemed tense, nervous. "Where to?" John asked, glancing at the rearview mirror. The man hesitated. "Just drive for now." "Red flag." John forced a chuckle. "That's not how this works, man. I need a destination." Silence. Then the man exhaled and muttered, "Fine. Outskirts. Near the old factory." John's stomach tightened. The old factory? The one abandoned for years? The place where cops found bodies a few months ago? He swallowed. "Just a ride, John. Just another ride." He put the car into drive, but as they pulled away, his eyes flicked to the mirror again. The guy's hands were still in his hoodie pockets, and something told him. They weren't empty. In just a few minutes, John's life was about to change forever. John's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than ever. The air in the car felt heavy, like the weight of something unseen pressing down on him. Every instinct in his body screamed danger, but he kept his face neutral, his breathing even. He had pulled up near the abandoned factory, its rusting metal structure looming under the dim glow of the streetlights. The place had been shut down for years, and no one had any good reason to be here. The stranger in the back seat shifted. John stiffened, his heart pounding in his ears. This is it. This is the moment something goes wrong. The man rustled in his pockets, and for a split second John was ready to bolt. His foot hovered over the gas pedal, his fingers flexed, calculating how fast he could yank the door handle and make a run for it. Then, a wad of cash landed on the passenger seat. John blinked. His breath came out in a shaky exhale. He turned his head slowly, his eyes flickering from the stack of bills to the man in the back seat. Underneath the hood, the man's face was partially shadowed, but there was something unsettling about the way his lips curled into a small, tired smile. "This is way too much," John murmured, picking up the cash. He shuffled through the bills, 20s, 50s, hundreds, a few $100s at least. "No mistake," the man said quietly. John swallowed hard. "Look, I appreciate it, but this ride wasn't worth—" The man raised a hand, not threatening, just a silent request for John to stop talking. And then he spoke words John would never forget. "You have a good heart, John. You have a good heart. Tonight, I'm happy, because I met you." For a moment, the world felt still. John stared at him, trying to process those words. Something in the man's tone, in his eyes, made John's skin prickle. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just kindness. It was finality. Like he had made some kind of decision. The man opened the door and stepped out into the darkness. He didn't say anything else. John watched as the man walked toward the factory, his figure disappearing into the shadows. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. John sat frozen for a long time, staring at the bills in his hand, the weight of the night pressing down on him. Somewhere deep inside, he knew something wasn't right. And whatever had just happened, this wasn't the end of it. The neon glow of the city flickered against the rain-slick streets as John guided his car through the winding roads, his fingers stiff against the steering wheel. His last ride of the night had taken him across town, and now, after nearly 12 hours on the road, he was finally heading to pick up his daughter. John's eyelids felt like lead, but exhaustion wasn't new to him. He had been driving for Uber for the past 6 months, ever since Lisa passed away. A deep sigh left his lips as he reached a red light. He drummed his fingers on the wheel and stole a glance at the empty passenger seat beside him. The silence in the car was suffocating. Lisa had always insisted on keeping a playlist running whenever they drove anywhere together. Soft acoustic songs, the kind he used to roll his eyes at but secretly enjoyed because they made her smile. Now the radio stayed off. His phone buzzed on the dashboard. A message from his sister, Rachel. "Rachel, hey, you're almost here. She's ready to go, just a little cranky." "Long day." John exhaled slowly before typing back. "John, on my way. Be there in 10. As the light turned green, he eased the car forward. He hated relying on Rachel so much, but he didn't have a choice. He wasn't home enough, and his daughter Maddie needed someone stable. He was doing his best, but his best never seemed good enough. The weight of the day clung to him as he pulled into Rachel's driveway. The small porch light flickered, illuminating the front door just as it swung open. A tiny figure barreled out into the night, arms wrapped tightly around a stuffed rabbit. "Daddy!" John barely had time to park before Maddie threw herself into his arms. "Hey, kiddo," he murmured, holding her close. The scent of baby shampoo mixed with the faintest hint of vanilla cookies clung to her sweater. She must have had a snack before bed. "You took forever," Maddie mumbled against his shoulder, her voice muffled with sleepiness. Rachel stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed. "She's been waiting by the window for the last 20 minutes. You working too much again?" John forced a smile. "Just another long shift." Rachel sighed, rubbing her arms against the cold. "You look like hell, John." "Yeah, well, that's life." She gave him a pointed look but didn't press. Instead, she crouched down to Maddie's level. "Be good for Daddy, okay?" Maddie nodded, but as soon as John buckled her into the car seat, she let out a soft yawn and murmured, "I'm already good." John chuckled despite himself. "Yeah, you are, kid." As he pulled out of the driveway, Maddie's head rested against the seat. "Daddy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah?" "Do I have to go to school tomorrow?" John glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his heart tightening. "Yeah, baby, but I'll take you in the morning, okay?" Maddie nodded sleepily. "Okay." The road stretched ahead of them, dark and empty. Another day had ended. Another long night awaited. The night stretched long and empty as John drove down the quiet highway, his mind replaying the words of the strange young man over and over. "You have a good heart, John. You have a good heart. Tonight, I'm happy, because I met you." What the hell had that meant? His fingers tightened on the wheel, exhaustion pulling at him like an invisible weight. He had done countless late-night shifts, but something about tonight felt different. There was an uneasiness he couldn't shake, like a low hum in the back of his skull. John's tiny apartment was far from the city, out in the quiet suburbs, past long stretches of open road. It was one of the few places he could afford after Lisa's passing, a place where he could raise Maddie in peace. In the back seat, Maddie was snuggled up, her small body wrapped in a blanket, her stuffed rabbit pressed to her cheek. The gentle rhythm of her breathing was the only sound inside the car. John sighed, rubbing his tired eyes with one hand while keeping the other on the wheel. The dim glow of the headlights barely cut through the darkness ahead, the winding road twisting left and right. And then, something flickered at the edge of his vision. John frowned. It was on his right side, like a shadow moving. At first, he thought it was just a trick of exhaustion, maybe saliva in his eye or some glare on the windshield. He blinked hard, scratching at the corner of his eye to clear it, but the figure remained. A crawling thing, moving unnaturally, its small limbs dragging against the asphalt. A chill ran down John's spine. His body tensed as the car rolled closer. What the hell was that? His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he squinted through the foggy glow of his headlights. And then, the creature stopped moving. John's breath caught in his throat. It was just a few dozen feet ahead. His instincts screamed at him to slow down, but his car was already moving fast, too fast for a deserted road. He tried to veer around it, angling the car slightly to the side. For a brief moment, as his headlights passed over the figure, he caught a clearer look, and his stomach dropped. It wasn't a creature. It was a baby. A tiny, shivering baby, crawling weakly on all fours, alone on the highway. John's pulse exploded in his chest. "Oh my God!" His foot slammed the brake, tires screeching as the car lurched to a halt. Maddie stirred awake, blinking groggily. "Daddy?" she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. John barely heard her. His whole body felt cold, numb. "Why did we stop?" Maddie frowned, sitting up. "Is everything okay?" John couldn't speak. His hands trembled as he put the car in reverse, backing up a few feet. The headlights now fully illuminated the baby. It sat in the middle of the road, dressed in thin pajamas, its tiny body shaking. Its cheeks were wet with tears, and it let out a weak, hoarse cry, the kind that only comes when a child has been crying for too long. John's mind raced. How the hell did a baby end up here? His protective instincts kicked in, pushing aside the fear gripping his gut. He turned to Maddie, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Everything's okay, sweetheart. Stay in the car. Don't worry." Maddie didn't say a word. She just stared at the baby through the windshield, her wide brown eyes frozen in shock. John threw the car into park, turned on the hazard lights, and flung his door open. The night air was cold against his skin as he sprinted to the baby, his heart hammering. The poor thing was freezing. John scooped the baby up, wrapping it in his arms, feeling the ice-cold fingers press against his shirt. "Shh, shh, I got you," he murmured, trying to calm the tiny, trembling body. The baby let out a choked sob, its tiny hands grabbing onto John's jacket, its face red from too much crying. John didn't waste a second. He turned and ran back to the car, opening the back door and sliding in beside Maddie. His daughter was pale, still staring at the baby like her mind couldn't process what was happening. "Daddy, is that a real baby?" she whispered. John nodded, his breath coming out in quick, short gasps. "Yeah, sweetheart, I just picked up a baby. In the middle of nowhere." Maddie's hands clenched her stuffed rabbit. She didn't speak. She just stared. The baby continued crying, but it was weak, like its voice had almost given out. John quickly shrugged off his jacket, wrapping it around the baby to keep it warm. He placed his hand gently on its tiny chest, feeling the rapid heartbeat beneath the fabric. "Daddy," Maddie finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whose baby is it?" John had no answer. He looked out at the empty road stretching into the darkness. No houses, no signs of people, no cars. There was nothing, just This baby. Alone, in the middle of the night. And John knew deep in his gut, someone had left it here on purpose. John's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, his breath coming in uneven bursts. He pressed 911 and put the phone to his ear. The operator answered immediately. 911, what's your emergency? John swallowed hard, his voice rough. I just found a baby, in the middle of the highway. It was crawling alone. I don't know where it came from. It's freezing. A brief pause, then the dispatcher's voice sharpened. Sir, did you say a baby? Yes. A real, living baby. It's freezing, crying. I have my daughter in the car and I don't know what to do. All right, sir. Stay calm. Where are you located? John glanced at the dim road signs in his rearview mirror. I'm on Highway 22, about 3 miles past the old gas station near Ridgeway. The dispatcher typed quickly. Understood. Stay where you are. Officers and an ambulance are on the way. ETA, 7 minutes. John exhaled shakily. Okay. Thank you. He hung up, gripping the baby tighter, trying to keep it warm in his jacket. And then something moved outside, a flicker in the darkness. At first, he thought it was just the wind rustling the trees, a trick of exhaustion playing with his mind. But then a figure emerged from the shadows. John's stomach dropped. It was an old woman dressed in a loose, flowing nightgown, her thin frame bathed in pale moonlight. She shuffled forward, her bare feet silent against the cold pavement. Her silver hair was wild and unkempt, her face lined with deep wrinkles. And then she saw the baby. Her entire expression changed. She lunged at the car, her gnarled fingers clawing at the door handle. "That's my baby!" she cried out, her voice cracking. "You found my baby! Give her back to me!" John's instincts screamed. Something about this woman wasn't right. He immediately reached over and hit the lock button. The doors clicked shut, sealing them inside. Maddie let out a frightened gasp. "Daddy, who is that?" John's pulse pounded in his ears. He gritted his teeth and spoke as calmly as possible. "I don't know, sweetheart. Just stay quiet, okay?" The old woman yanked at the door again, her bony fingers shaking. "Open the door!" she shrieked. "That's my baby!" John turned slightly, shielding the baby with his body. No way in hell was he handing this child over. Something felt off. Something felt terribly wrong. His voice was firm, steady. "Mom, I've already called the police. They're on their way." The old woman froze. Her pale, watery eyes snapped up to meet his. For a long moment she just stared at him, her thin chest rising and falling in short, quick breaths. Then, slowly, her expression twisted into something darker. Her lips curled into a snarl. Bang! John and Maddie both jumped as the woman slammed her fist against the window. "Give me my baby!" she shrieked. "You have no right!" Maddie whimpered, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Daddy, I'm scared." John's entire body locked up. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here." He kept his voice calm for Maddie's sake, but inside panic churned in his stomach. The old woman slammed both fists against the glass now, her entire body convulsing with rage. Her frail appearance contradicted the sheer force with which she hit the car. The baby in John's arms let out a weak wail, its little fingers clutching his shirt. Something is very, very wrong. Then the woman stopped. She suddenly stood completely still, her gaze locked onto John's, and she smiled. A slow, unsettling grin stretched across her face. It was the kind of smile that made John's skin crawl. And then she whispered, "You shouldn't have picked it up." John's blood turned to ice. His mouth went dry, his hands clenched around the baby protectively. The woman took a single step backward, her sunken eyes never leaving his face. Then, the sound of sirens. Flashing red and blue lights appeared in the distance, growing closer. The woman's smile vanished. She turned her head slightly, the red and blue glow reflecting off her gaunt, wrinkled skin. John's breathing hitched. He expected her to run, to react, to do something, but instead, she just whispered one last thing. It's too late now. And then, she turned and walked into the darkness. The sirens grew louder and John felt his heart slamming against his ribs. Maddie clung to him, her small hands trembling. The baby let out another tiny cry. John exhaled shakily. What the hell just happened? And why did he feel like this was only the beginning? The moment the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the dark highway, John finally felt a weight lift from his chest. The officers and paramedics stepped out of their vehicles, moving quickly. John clutched the shivering baby, keeping him close to his chest as he stepped out of the car. Maddie, still in the back seat, sat frozen, her eyes locked on the empty darkness where the old woman had disappeared. An officer, tall, broad-shouldered, and with a no-nonsense look about him, approached John. His badge read, Sergeant David Reyes. "Sir," Reyes said, pulling out a small notebook. "You the one who made the call?" John nodded. "Yeah. I found the baby crawling on the road. He was freezing." He glanced down at the child, his small face still red from crying, his tiny hands gripping John's jacket as if it were the only safe thing in the world. One of the paramedics, a woman in her late 30s, stepped forward. "Here, let me take him," she said softly. John hesitated. He had barely let go of the baby since picking him up, but finally, he gently passed him over. The baby let out a tiny whimper, but the warmth of the paramedic's blanket seemed to calm him. Sergeant Reyes continued, flipping through his notes. "You said you saw a woman. Can you describe her?" John swallowed hard, his mind flashing back to the haggard figure in the nightgown, her wild eyes, her bony fingers clawing at the door handle. Old, white hair, thin, frail-looking, but strong. She kept saying the baby was hers. When I told her I called the police, she got aggressive. She hit my car. Screamed at me. Reyes frowned, exchanging glances with another officer. And then? Then she stopped. She just stared at me and said something really weird. Reyes raised an eyebrow. Weird how? John hesitated, then repeated it. You shouldn't have picked it up. Reyes's expression darkened. He nodded slowly and signaled to his officers. All right, he said. We'll start looking into it. We'll be in touch. John's gut twisted. Can you let me know if you find anything? Reyes studied him for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, we will. The next day, John was still thinking about the old woman's words as he drove Maddie to school. She sat quietly in the back seat, hugging her stuffed rabbit. Usually she'd be chattering about school, or what she wanted for lunch, or something random about a cartoon she liked. Today, nothing. You okay, sweetheart? John asked. Maddie shifted, pulling her seatbelt tighter. Daddy, she hesitated. Who was that lady? John gripped the steering wheel. I don't know, baby. Maddie looked out the window. She scared me. Me too, John admitted. They pulled up to the school. Maddie hesitated, then asked, Is the baby okay? John gave her a small smile. Yeah, sweetheart, he's safe now. She nodded as if that was all she needed to hear and hopped out of the car. Later that morning, as John started his Uber shift, his phone rang. Sergeant Reyes. John answered immediately. Yeah? Reyes got straight to the point. We found the woman. We need you to come down to this address. He rattled off the location. John felt his stomach drop. It was near the same highway where he had found the baby. His hands tightened around the wheel. I'll be there. When John arrived, his pulse quickened at the sight of several police cars parked outside a small, run-down trailer. A couple of news vans were parked nearby, and the second he stepped out of his car, reporters swarmed him. Sir, were you the one who found the baby? Do you know the woman who left him? Why was the baby abandoned? John's head spun, but before he could even think of responding, Sergeant Reyes waved them away. Move back. Give him space. Reyes grabbed John's arm and guided him inside the trailer. And that's when John saw her. Nancy. She was sitting on a small couch, cradling the baby, rocking him gently. The second she saw John, she froze. "Are you the man who saved him?" she asked. John nodded slowly. Nancy stood, her legs shaking, and held the baby close. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. "Thank you," she choked out. "Thank you for saving my son." The weight of what happened finally settled on John's chest. What happened?" he asked softly. Nancy wiped at her eyes, trying to compose herself. "My name's Nancy Carter. I work as a registered nurse at the hospital. Last night I was on shift. I left my son with my mother." She paused, taking a shuddering breath. John's heart clenched. He turned his head slowly. There, in the far corner of the trailer, sat the old woman from last night. Amy. Her frail body rocked gently in an old armchair, her lips moving as she mumbled to herself. John felt his chest tighten. Nancy followed his gaze. "She has dementia. But she wasn't always like this," she whispered. John finally spoke. "What happened last night?" Nancy inhaled shakily. She must have had one of her episodes. She got confused. I think she thought she was back in the past when I was a baby, and for some reason, she must have taken Ben and... She squeezed her eyes shut. "And she left him outside." John stared at the old woman. Amy just kept swaying. Silence pressed in around them. John's skin prickled. The air in the small trailer felt heavy, thick with unspoken tension. Nancy sat on the worn-out couch, her face pale, her eyes still wet with tears as she cradled baby Ben. Across from her, Sergeant Reyes stood with a clipboard in one hand, his expression unreadable. "Look," Reyes said, his voice even but firm. "I understand that your mother has dementia. I get it. But that doesn't change the fact that she left your baby outside, alone in the freezing cold. You're lucky this man," he gestured toward John, "found him before something worse happened." Nancy's grip on Ben tightened. I know," she whispered. "I know how serious this is, but please don't report this. I'm doing my best." Reyes sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Nancy, I can't just ignore this. You left an infant with someone who's not capable of caring for him. I have to report this to social services." Nancy's breath hitched, her eyes widening in panic. "No, please." She stood up so suddenly that Ben let out a startled whimper. "Please, I can't. They'll take him away from me." Reyes frowned, his tone softening but still resolute. "That's not what we want. But you need to prove that your home is safe for him. You need a nanny, a caretaker, a family member, someone who can be here when you're at work." Nancy's shoulders slumped. "I can't afford a nanny," she said quietly. John, who had been standing near the doorway, felt a pang in his chest. He knew this struggle too well. Raising a child alone was like carrying a weight no one else could see. The exhaustion, the constant fear of not doing enough, the guilt of leaving them behind because you had to work just to keep a roof over their heads. John should have left by now. The officers were wrapping up their statements, getting ready to go. But he didn't move. Something held him back. Maybe it was seeing Nancy struggle with the same battle he had fought. Or maybe it was the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Something didn't add up. His eyes drifted toward Ben, now nestled against his mother's chest, sucking on his tiny fingers. Nancy had said that her mother must have wandered outside with the baby and left him there, but John's stomach twisted as he thought about that night again. Ben had been at least a mile away from the trailer. He was a baby. There was no way he could have crawled that far on his own. And that old woman? She had appeared out of nowhere. One second the road was empty, the next she was right outside his car, clawing at the door. John glanced at the officers, expecting them to be questioning this very thing. But they weren't. The moment John stepped out of the trailer, he regretted it. A wave of reporters surged toward him, their microphones and cameras shoved too close for comfort. The flashing lights from their cameras blinded him, and the noise, the rapid-fire questions, the voices talking over each other, was overwhelming. "Sir, can you tell us exactly how you found the baby? Do you believe this was an act of neglect or something more sinister? People are already calling you a hero. How does it feel to save a child's life?" Hero. The word made John's stomach twist. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't some good Samaritan with a heart of gold. He was just a man coming home from work. That's all. Anyone else in his shoes would have done the same thing, right? Still, he answered their questions as best he could, keeping his responses short and neutral. He didn't want to make this into something bigger than it was. Once the questions slowed down, he took his chance and slipped into his car. He pulled away, gripping the wheel tightly as the voices faded behind him. He drove about a mile before pulling over onto a quiet patch of road. He needed to breathe. He needed a minute to collect his thoughts. Looking into the rearview mirror, he watched as the cluster of news vans and police cars slowly dispersed in the distance. Once they were gone, he made a decision. He turned the car around. When John pulled up to the trailer again, Nancy was outside. She stood on the small wooden steps, holding Ben against her chest. The baby's head was nestled against her shoulder, his tiny hands curled into fists. The second she saw John's car approaching, her expression changed. John parked and stepped out. Nancy hesitated for a moment, then started walking toward him. The baby stirred slightly, but Nancy gently rocked him, soothing him back to sleep. When she reached John, she stopped. For a few seconds, she just stood there, searching for the right words. Finally, she said, "I'm sorry." John furrowed his brows. "For what?" Nancy sighed, shifting Ben slightly in her arms. "For not properly thanking you. For everything you did." John shook his head. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do," she interrupted, her voice firm. She looked down at her son, then back at John. "The reporters were right," she said, her voice quieter now. "You are a hero." John's chest tightened. "No, I'm not." Nancy gave him a look. "John, not a lot of cars pass on that road at night. You know that, right?" John swallowed hard. He did know that. That stretch of road was practically deserted after midnight. That's why it was so strange that the baby was there in the first place. Nancy's voice cracked slightly. "If you hadn't been driving home at that exact moment, if you hadn't noticed him—" She squeezed her eyes shut for a second, as if pushing away the thought. "I can't even imagine what would have happened," she whispered. John exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I was just at the right place at the right time. That's all." Nancy shook her head. "Number, that's not all. You didn't just find him. You saved him. You saved my son." For a long moment, John just stood there, letting her words settle. His entire life had been about just getting by. Work, pay the bills, take care of Maddie, repeat. But now, for the first time in a long time, he had done something that mattered, something that changed a life. Nancy's eyes softened. "I don't know how to repay you," she said. "I really don't." John let out a small, tired chuckle. "You don't have to." Nancy shifted her weight, hesitating for a second. "Can I at least offer you a coffee?" she asked. John thought about it. Part of him wanted to say no, to go home, collapse into bed, and forget about everything for a few hours. But another part of him, a part of him that still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. "Sure," he said. Nancy gave a small, relieved smile and turned back toward the trailer. As John followed her inside, he cast one last glance at the far corner of the room. Amy was still there, still rocking, still whispering to herself. John sat stiffly in the old kitchen chair, his fingers gripping the coffee mug that Nancy had given him. He hadn't taken a sip. His gaze kept drifting toward Amy, who sat in the far corner of the trailer, rocking back and forth, whispering things no one else seemed to hear. He was trying not to stare, but he could feel it. Her eyes flicking toward him, her lips moving in silent words. John set down the mug. Nancy must have sensed his discomfort because she gently placed a hand on his arm. "Do you want to step outside?" John met her eyes, hesitated, then nodded. They walked in silence toward the old wooden bench outside the trailer. It sat beneath a large oak tree, its wooden planks worn from years of exposure. Nancy adjusted Ben in her arms, gently rocking him as she sat down. John followed suit, lowering himself onto the bench beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The night air was crisp, the scent of damp earth lingering after the previous night's chill. Then, Nancy let out a soft sigh. "Thank you." John turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "For what?" Nancy gave him a small, tired smile. "For not tipping off the officers about the details that didn't make sense." John said nothing, because of course he wanted to know more. There were too many loose ends, too many unanswered questions. Nancy looked away, staring off toward the distant trees. Her grip on Ben tightened slightly. Then she spoke. "My mum. She wasn't always like this," Nancy said, her voice quiet. John listened carefully, watching as her fingers gently stroked Ben's tiny hand. "She was strong, smart, loving. She raised me on her own. I never knew my father." She swallowed hard. "But just because I never met him doesn't mean he wasn't there." John felt a prickle on the back of his neck. Nancy inhaled deeply before continuing. "His name was Richard." She paused, her eyes flickering with something distant and heavy. "He was a special man," she said carefully, "but not in a good way." John remained silent. "He was obsessed with my mom. Possessive. Controlling. Paranoid," Nancy whispered. "He was so jealous of everything she did, who she spoke to, where she went, even how she breathed." John clenched his jaw. He had seen that kind of control before, but Nancy wasn't done. "When I was born, something inside him snapped," she continued. "He was convinced I wasn't his daughter. No matter what my mum said, no matter how much proof she gave him, he didn't believe it." Her breath hitched. "And one night..." John's stomach tightened. Nancy looked down at Ben, her fingers gently caressing his tiny back. "One night he took me," she said. "He drove me out into the woods, and he tried to get rid of me." A chill ran down John's spine. Nancy's voice trembled. "My mum, she woke up and realized I was gone. She knew. Somehow she knew exactly where he had taken me. She ran barefoot through the forest searching for me in the dark." She closed her eyes as if trying to push the memory away. "And when she found him..." Nancy paused, her fingers tightening into a fist. John didn't breathe. "He was holding me, over the edge of a bridge." John's chest tightened. His mind flashed to Ben crawling on the cold pavement alone in the night. Nancy let out a shaky breath. "My mum begged him to stop," she continued. "She swore that I was his, swore she had never been with anyone else, but he wouldn't listen. He kept saying I wasn't his, that she had betrayed him." Her lips pressed together, her voice barely a whisper now. "And then he let go." John froze. Nancy took a shuddering breath. "I don't remember any of it," she admitted. "I was just a baby. But my mom told me. She jumped in after me. The river was freezing, the current strong, but she held on to me. She saved me." John felt a knot in his throat. Nancy inhaled sharply. "By the time she got me to safety, Richard was gone. He disappeared. The police searched, but they never found him. Some people think he ran away. Others think he drowned trying to escape." Her voice grew softer. "My mom, she never talked about him after that. Never even said his name. But she was never the same." John swallowed hard. "She raised me with so much love, but she also raised me with fear," Nancy admitted. "She was always watching, always locking the doors, always making sure nothing would take me away again." She exhaled, looking toward the dark horizon. "And now," she whispered, "now she's the one who took my baby away." Silence hung between them. John sat on the old wooden bench, his body tense as Nancy's words settled deep into his bones. He was shocked, not just by the story, but by the sheer pain woven through it. A mother risking everything to save her child. A daughter burdened with the weight of a past she never asked for. A family unraveling under the crushing weight of illness and abandonment. Nancy exhaled slowly, her grip on baby Ben tightening as if he were the only thing grounding her in this moment. "My mum never told me the story until I was old enough to understand," she said softly. "She kept it from me for years, and I get why." "How do you tell your kid that their father tried to throw them into a river?" John didn't have an answer for that. He ran a hand over his face, blowing out a slow breath. His mind kept circling back to one thought: how far a mother would go for her child. Amy had saved Nancy. Nancy was now doing the same for Ben. John knew that feeling too well. He thought of Maddie asleep in bed while he spent nights driving, picking up strangers for fares, working until his body screamed for rest. Because when you had a child, there was no stopping, no giving up. You kept going, no matter what. Nancy sighed, shifting slightly. "Things changed when my mom got sick," she admitted. John looked up. Nancy gave a small, sad smile. "It wasn't bad at first, just little things. She'd forget where she left her keys, forget if she'd already eaten. But then she started forgetting where she was. Sometimes she'd forget who I was." Her voice hitched. "And that's when Eric started to change," she whispered. John could already guess where this was going. He stayed quiet, letting her talk. "Eric knew about my mum's illness before we got married. He said it didn't matter, that he'd be there for me no matter what." She laughed bitterly. "And at first he tried. He tolerated her. But then she started having more complicated episodes. She'd wander out of the house. She'd wake up in the middle of the night and start screaming for me, thinking she was back in the past, back with my father." She shook her head, eyes dark with old pain. "Eric, he didn't want to deal with it. He kept saying he didn't sign up for this, that my mother was ruining our life." John clenched his jaw. He had met men like Eric before, men who made promises they couldn't keep. Nancy scoffed, her fingers tightening into fists. "And when I got pregnant with Ben, that was his excuse to finally leave. He said it wasn't about my mom, but I knew the truth. He couldn't handle the responsibility. He didn't want to be tied down to a sick mother-in-law and a baby on the way." John didn't realize his hands had balled into fists. "That bastard," he muttered under his breath. Nancy gave a humorless chuckle. "Yeah, I thought the same thing. But at the end of the day, it was a relief in a way. At least I wasn't wasting time hoping he'd grow a backbone." She let out a shaky breath. "But I love my mum," she continued. "And I'd do anything to protect her. Even if that means fighting social services. Even if that means working double shifts just to make sure Ben has everything he needs. Even if that means staying up at night, terrified that one day she'll wander off and never come back." Her voice was raw now, filled with exhaustion, love, and fear. "I can't let her go to some home, John," she whispered. "I just can't." John studied her carefully. He could see the desperation in her eyes, the guilt. She was trying to hold everything together, but the cracks were showing. He had been there before. After Lisa died, John had spent months drowning, trying to balance being a father and provider, fighting through exhaustion just to make it to the next day. And now, sitting beside Nancy, he could see the same battle waging inside her. He exhaled deeply. "You're a good mom, Nancy," he said quietly. Nancy looked at him, startled by the words. John gave a small shrug. "I know what it's like, trying to do it all on your own. It's hard, but you're doing it." Nancy's eyes softened. She let out a small, tired laugh. "Coming from the guy who saved my son in the middle of the night, I'll take that as a compliment." John chuckled, shaking his head. "I just did what anyone would have done." Nancy smirked. "Number not, anyone would have stopped." John didn't argue, because deep down, he knew she was right. They sat there in silence, the cool air wrapping around them. Nancy gently rocked Ben, her fingers tracing circles on his tiny back. John glanced at the trailer. Through the window, he could see Amy still rocking in her chair, staring blankly into nothing. The night had stretched longer than John had anticipated. He glanced at his watch. Almost time to pick up Maddie. He turned back to Nancy, who was rocking Ben in her arms, exhaustion written all over her face. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere, "for opening up to me. You didn't have to. I'm just a stranger who happened to be there." Nancy looked up at him, her lips pressing together into a small, tired smile. "Not a stranger," she said softly. "Not anymore." John gave a small nod. He wasn't sure what else to say. Nancy adjusted Ben in her arms and exhaled. "Good luck, John," she said. John smirked, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. "You too." And with that he turned and headed toward his car. The drive to Maddie's school was quiet. But John's mind, it wouldn't shut up. Thoughts kept creeping in, despite his attempts to brush them aside. How was Nancy going to handle this? Would she really be okay? Would social services take Ben away if they thought Amy was too much of a risk? The moment John pulled up in front of the school, the doors burst open and Maddie came sprinting toward the car, her backpack bouncing behind her. "Daddy!" she screamed, beaming with excitement. John barely had time to unlock the door before she threw herself into the back seat, slamming the door shut behind her. "You were on TV!" she gasped, her eyes wide. "Like, actual TV. The whole school was talking about it. You're a hero, Daddy." John chuckled, shaking his head as he pulled out of the parking lot. "I'm not a hero, Mads. I just—" "Yes, you are," Maddie insisted. "That's what everyone said. You saved a baby. That's like the coolest thing ever." John sighed but smiled. "You shouldn't believe everything you see on TV, kiddo." Maddie folded her arms, still grinning ear to ear. "You can't fool me. You totally are a hero." John let out a mock groan, rubbing his temple. "Oh, great. Now you're never going to let this go, huh?" "Nope," Maddie chirped proudly. John laughed, shaking his head. They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Maddie piped up again. "Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetheart?" "How's the baby?" John glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Her big, curious eyes stared at him, full of genuine concern. He softened. "His name is Ben," he said, "and he's doing okay." Maddie smiled, satisfied with the answer. But then, after a few seconds, she frowned slightly. "What actually happened?" she asked. John hesitated. "How do you explain something like that to a 7-year-old? He took a deep breath and chose his words carefully. Maddie clutched her stuffed rabbit, absorbing the information. "But how did he get there?" she asked. John paused. "We don't know yet," he admitted. "His mum thinks his grandmother, who's very sick, might have wandered off with him. But—" He trailed off. Maddie, however, wasn't satisfied. She thought for a moment, then tilted her head. "So, what's going to happen now?" John sighed, rubbing his neck. "Well, his mom is going to have to figure things out. The police and social services are involved now. They want to make sure Ben is safe." Maddie frowned. "That's hard," she murmured. John nodded. "Yeah, it is." She was quiet for a few more moments, staring out the window. Then she turned back to John, a thoughtful look on her face. "Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetheart." "Did you offer to help her?" John blinked. "Help?" he repeated. Maddie nodded, completely serious. "Yeah, you leave me with Aunt Rachel or Ms. Gonzalez when you go to work, right? Because you need someone to take care of me." John opened his mouth, then closed it. Because damn, he hadn't even thought of it like that. Maddie tilted her head, giving him a curious look. "So, maybe Ben's mommy needs help too?" John stared at his daughter through the rearview mirror, a slow smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You're a pretty smart kid, you know that," he said. Maddie beamed. "I know," she said, grinning. John chuckled and shook his head, but deep down, he knew Maddie was right. Nancy was struggling. Amy was only getting worse. And Ben needed stability. John exhaled. He had done his part, saved the baby, called the police, stepped away. But maybe it wasn't time to step away just yet. Maddie turned to him, grinning wide. So, are we going to help them? John thought about it for a moment. Then, smiling to himself, he said, "We'll see, Mads. We'll see." And for the first time since that strange, fateful night, John felt like he had a plan, even if he didn't know exactly where it would lead. After days of Maddie's relentless questions about Ben, is he eating okay, Daddy? Is his mum still sad? Does he have new toys yet? He caved. John had finally given in. He figured a quick visit wouldn't hurt. And truthfully, he was curious too. So, on a bright Saturday morning, he buckled Maddie into the car and stopped at a store on the way. Maddie took her time, carefully picking out a few teething toys, holding each one up as if she were making a critical life decision. "This one looks fun," she said, squinting at a blue rubber ring. John chuckled. "It's not a toy for you, kid. Just pick a couple and let's go." Maddie rolled her eyes but finally settled on 3. As they made their way to the register, she suddenly veered off to the flower section. John sighed. "Mads, let's go." She ignored him, standing in front of a bouquet of soft pink roses, arms crossed, an all-too-smart look on her face. "Don't you want to be a gentleman, Daddy?" she asked innocently. John blinked. "What?" Maddie gave him a knowing look. "You know, take flowers for the ladies. Grandma always said men with good manners bring flowers." John stared at his daughter, floored. Maddie grinned, rocking on her heels. "What?" she said, all too pleased with herself. John groaned, rubbing the back of his neck. "Fine," he muttered, grabbing a bouquet of fresh daisies and pink roses. Maddie clapped her hands together. "You're such a gentleman, Daddy." John sighed. He was never going to live this down. John pulled up to the small trailer, hoping they were home. They were. Nancy stood outside, hanging freshly washed sheets on a clothesline. When she turned and saw his car, her face lit up in surprise, and when Maddie hopped out of the car, her smile grew even wider. "Well, well," Nancy said, brushing a stray hair from her face. "Look who it is." John stuffed his hands into his pockets. "Maddie wouldn't let me live in peace. She had to make sure Ben was okay." Maddie grinned, holding her stuffed rabbit tightly. "I'm Maddie. My daddy saved your baby." Nancy chuckled, glancing at John. "He sure did. And I bet you helped him, didn't you?" Maddie nodded proudly. "Uh-huh." I asked lots of questions. Daddy said we had to come check on baby Ben. Nancy touched, reaching out gently. "Well, Maddie, that means a lot. Thank you for caring about us." Maddie smiling brightly. "That's what family does, right?" Nancy paused, her eyes softening. Yeah, that's exactly right." Nancy was genuinely touched. "Well, you're just in time. He woke up not too long ago and has been cooing to his grandma." At the mention of Amy, John noticed Maddie glance up at him. Nancy seemed to catch it too because she quickly reassured them. "Don't worry," she said gently. "She's on special medication. It helps keep her calm." John nodded. He wasn't sure why, but he felt an odd sense of relief. Nancy led them inside. The small living room smelled of clean linen and faint lavender. Amy sat in her usual chair, slowly rocking back and forth. Nancy leaned down with a warm smile. "Mama, we have visitors." Amy blinked slowly and then smiled. "Oh, well, welcome," she said pleasantly. Nancy turned back to John and Maddie. "She doesn't really remember much, so I just introduce people as good old friends. It's easier that way." John nodded in understanding. Maddie, however, was already focused on Ben. She knelt beside the baby, staring into his big, curious eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Ben giggled. Maddie grinned. "You're so tiny," she whispered. She pulled out the teething toy and held it up. "Here, this is for you." Ben's little fingers clumsily reached out, grabbing it and shoving it straight into his mouth. Nancy laughed softly. "He likes it." Maddie beamed. "Good. He deserves lots of toys." John watched the scene, something warm settling in his chest. Then he remembered the flowers. He had been so focused on Maddie and Ben that he completely forgot about them. Feeling slightly ridiculous, he cleared his throat. I'll be right back. He stepped outside, grabbed the bouquet from the car, and walked back in. Nancy's breath hitched the second she saw them. Her smile softened, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes. John felt awkward as hell. "They're, from Maddie," he said quickly, glancing down at his daughter. Maddie, without missing a beat, grinned up at Nancy. "No, they're not." Nancy laughed, her cheeks turning a faint shade of pink. She took the flowers gently, running her fingers over the petals. "They're beautiful. Thank you, John." John rubbed his neck. "Yeah, well, figured you deserved something nice." Nancy's smile lingered, and for a moment there was a quiet warmth between them. Then Maddie clapped her hands together. "See, Daddy? I told you. You're a gentleman." John groaned while Nancy burst into laughter. He gave Maddie a half-hearted glare. "You're never going to let me live this down, are you?" Maddie grinned. "Nope." Nancy chuckled, placing the flowers in a small vase near the kitchen. "Well, I think it's sweet." John sighed, shaking his head but couldn't help smiling. Maddie was right about one thing. Maybe being a gentleman wasn't so bad after all. That day was one of the best days in a long time for John. For the past 6 months, his life had been nothing but work, exhaustion, and survival. Driving people around, making ends meet, barely pausing to breathe. But today he had finally stopped. Stopped to look at Maddie. Really look at her, at the way her smile lit up a room, at how she had more kindness in her tiny heart than most adults John had ever met. Stopped to look at himself, realizing how much he had been existing rather than living. And he had felt something else too, something strange, something that told him he didn't want to leave Nancy behind. It was close to midnight when Maddie finally fell asleep, right there in Ben's crib. Ben was still wide awake, cooing softly, reaching for her tiny hand as if he was trying to bite it or hold on to her. It was adorable. Nancy chuckled as she picked up Ben, rocking him gently. "I think he's got a new best friend." John grinned. "Well, Maddie sure thinks he's hers now." Amy was already asleep in her room, the house finally quiet. Nancy and John stepped outside, letting the cool night air wash over them. They talked about life, about parenting, the struggles, the exhaustion, about small things like how Maddie was already acting like an older sister to Ben, or how Nancy made the best homemade cookies, or how John still struggled with making pancakes without burning them. But something was off about John tonight. Something about the way he looked at Nancy, like there was something unspoken sitting between them. And then he finally said it. "The real reason Maddie and I came here today," he murmured, rubbing his hands together. "I wanted to help out, if you needed it." Nancy didn't respond at first, she just smiled. Not the polite kind, not the forced kind. A real, knowing smile. John cleared his throat with, your mom and Ben. "It can't be easy." Nancy adjusted Ben in her arms. "With a mom like mine?" She chuckled softly. "I sure need all the help I can get." John laughed too, but deep down he knew he was lying to himself. Because the truth, he didn't just want to help, he didn't just feel responsible, he felt pulled toward her. Inexplicably. Irrevocably. From that night on, everything changed. Nancy and John came up with a schedule. They took turns watching the kids while the other worked. John would pick Maddie up from school and drop by the trailer so she could spend time with Ben. Nancy would cook meals for all of them, making sure John and Maddie actually ate home-cooked food instead of whatever greasy fast food he usually grabbed on the go. The arrangement was perfect for both of them. But slowly, the deal turned into something else, something bigger. One evening after putting the kids to sleep, John and Nancy sat outside again just like they had that first night. But this time, John didn't feel hesitant. He reached for her hand, and when she didn't pull away, he held it tight. Nancy turned toward him, her brown eyes searching his. John took a deep breath. I don't know what this is, he admitted, his voice quiet. But I know I don't want to let it go. Nancy's lips curved into a soft smile. You're thinking too much, she whispered. And then, before he could respond, she leaned in and kissed him. It was gentle, hesitant, but full of something deeper. Something that had been building between them since the night he saved Ben. And just like that, John knew. He wasn't alone anymore. John was raised traditionally. And after a week of kissing Nancy every chance he got, he couldn't take it anymore. He walked into the trailer, looked Nancy dead in the eye and said, I'm just going to say it. I want to marry you. Nancy blinked, completely caught off guard. You what? She laughed. I can't just be kissing you like this without making it official, John said, rubbing the back of his neck. And, you know, I want this. All of it. You, Ben, Maddie. I want us to be a family. Nancy stared at him, her heart pounding, and then she laughed, shaking her head. You're ridiculous, she whispered. John smirked. Is that a yes? Nancy rolled her eyes, and then she kissed him again. And that was all the answer he needed. John and Nancy got married, and it had been 2 years since they blended their broken pieces into something whole again. Life had been sweet. John had never expected to find love again, let alone a second family, but somehow Nancy, Ben, and Amy had become a part of him, just as much as Maddie was his whole world. Amy was difficult at times, her illness growing worse, but John never treated her like a burden. He couldn't. Not when he had lost his own mother so young, when he had spent years wishing he had someone to care for. Maddie, bless her big heart, had formed an unexpected bond with Amy. Most kids wouldn't have had the patience, but Maddie, she adored Amy. She would sit beside her at night reading bedtime stories in her small, careful voice. And Amy, despite her illness, would giggle at the stories, reacting as if she were a child herself. Sometimes it shocked John. This was the same woman who couldn't remember her own daughter at times, the same woman who had screamed at the walls, lost in past horrors. And yet here she was, smiling softly at Maddie's voice, laughing at the silly adventures in a children's book. It was strange how dementia worked, how it could steal memories, yet leave behind so much warmth. John had gotten used to being on alert at night. Amy had wandered off before, but tonight it was different. Ben had caught a terrible cold, his little body burning with fever. The previous night had been a nightmare. Ben crying, coughing, keeping John and Nancy awake until dawn. By the time morning came, they were exhausted. They thought Amy had taken her medication, but lately she had been refusing to swallow her pills. And so, in the middle of the night, she slipped out again. John woke up groggy, his body heavy with exhaustion. He didn't even know why he woke up at first. Maybe a father's instinct, maybe just habit. But as soon as he walked down the hallway, he felt it. Something was off. The trailer was too quiet. His heart kicked up a notch. John stepped toward Amy's room, pushing the door open. Empty. His stomach dropped. He didn't even think, just threw on his boots, grabbed a jacket, and rushed outside. Amy. His voice echoed into the night. He ran toward the tree line, his breath visible in the cold air. Amy! Where are you? Nothing. John's panic spiked. If she had wandered too far, if she was lost in the cold, his fingers tightened around his phone. He was about to call the police when a faint voice. John froze. He turned toward the creek. Amy was sitting near the creek, her body shaking violently. Her thin nightgown was damp, the hem soaked from the cold earth. She was muttering to herself, her arms wrapped around her frail body. John raced toward her, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. Amy! He dropped beside her, shrugging off his jacket, wrapping it around her shoulders. She flinched, her eyes glassy and lost. Her lips trembled. I didn't want her to die, she whispered. John stilled. His grip on her tightened slightly. Amy, he said carefully. Who are you talking about? Amy shook her head, rocking back and forth. The baby, she murmured. My precious baby. John's breath caught. He knew she meant Nancy. 2 months later, Amy had a stroke. She passed away peacefully, surrounded by her daughter, her grandson, and the new family that had formed around them. After the funeral, as the guests slowly trickled away, John and Nancy remained at the cemetery, standing by Amy's grave. Nancy's hand gripped his tightly, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. She was the best mother I could have ever asked for, she whispered. John pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I know, he murmured. She loved you. Nancy closed her eyes, resting her head against his chest. And then, John saw him, a face in the distance standing by the trees. John squinted, and his heart stopped. It was him, the young man he dropped off near the factory that night, the one who had given him a wad of cash and disappeared into the night. The man met John's eyes, and then he tipped his hat. John's breath caught, and suddenly he remembered his words. You have a good heart, John. Tonight, I'm happy, because I met you. John blinked, but when he looked again, the man was gone. John let out a slow exhale, looking down at Nancy, who was still nestled in his arms. He kissed her forehead, holding her closer. He still didn't know who that man was, or if he was dreaming. John smiled and began walking, his fingers gently intertwined with Nancy's as they strolled together.